The bridge of the UEDF frigate Murasame was silent. It was a heavy, thick silence that pressed down on the crew. Captain Lee Jun stood in the center of the bridge, his hands clasped tightly behind his back. On the main view screen, the starfield was peaceful. But everyone knew that peace was a lie. They were waiting at the edge of the solar system, the last line of defense for Earth. Lee Jun was a man who carried his calmness like a shield. His face, usually so composed, was tight with tension. He looked at his crew. Each person was at their station, staring at their screens, waiting for the end of the world to come screaming out of the dark. At the engineering console, Park Chul ran a diagnostic for the third time. He was a man who trusted machines more than speeches. His hands moved with a practiced ease over the controls, checking power levels, engine output, and shield integrity. Everything was perfect. It had to be. He knew that against the Kthar, perfection was the only thing that might let them survive for a few extra seconds. He thought of his daughter, Yuna, back on Earth. He had promised her he would see the stars and come home. He pushed the thought away. There was no room for it here in the medical bay. A small room tucked away from the main bridge. Medic Kim Soo checked her supplies for the 10th time. Bandages, coagulants, painkillers. It all felt so small, so useless. The stories from the first encounters with the Kthar were clear. Their weapons did not just wound. They vaporized, they melted, they tore ships apart from the inside. What use were bandages against that? She was young, her hands still remembering the graduation ceremony. Now they might be the last hands to touch a crewmate. She took a slow, deep breath, forcing herself to be steady at the communications station. Yoon Min listened. His world was one of sound. The constant, low hum of the ship's reactor. The faint crackle of cosmic background radiation. The silent, waiting emptiness of space. He had heard the first frantic, broken transmissions from the outer colonies. Then the silence that followed. He adjusted the headset over his ears, his fingers delicate on the dials. He was looking for any signal, any whisper of what was to come. So far, there was only the hum. Then it happened. It started not with a bang, but with a flicker on the long-range scanner. A single, unidentified contact. Then another. Then 100. Then 1,000. Contact, a sensor officer said, his voice cracking on the word. Multiple contacts, emerging from the distortion field. It's the entire Kthar Armada. The view screen lit up. The peaceful starfield was blotted out by a geometric swarm of alien vessels. They were angular and dark, like shards of broken obsidian floating in space. They moved with a silent, terrifying coordination. There was no chatter on their comms, no engine flare that human eyes could see. They just advanced, a wall of silent death. Captain Lee Jun's voice cut through the rising panic on the bridge. It was calm, but it carried an edge of finality. All hands, battle stations. Red alert. Power up all defensive systems. Comms, broadcast to the fleet. Form the defensive line, pattern Delta. Hold them here. Alarms blared, and the red emergency lights painted the bridge in a bloody glow. The silence was shattered by the frantic sounds of preparation. Park Chul's hands flew across his console, routing all available power to the forward shields and weapons. Shields at maximum. Plasma cannons charged and ready, he reported, his voice a low growl. The United Earth Defense Fleet, a beautiful, glittering collection of human ingenuity, moved into position. Hundreds of ships, from massive dreadnoughts to small, fast corvettes like the Murasame. For a moment, they looked powerful. They looked like they could win. The Kthar Armada did not slow down. The first volley was not a volley at all. It was a wave. Lances of emerald green energy, brighter than any star, shot from the lead Kthar ships. They did not arc. They moved in perfectly straight lines, ignoring the rules of physics that human ships were bound by. The first ship to die was the UEDF Beijing, a heavy cruiser. The green energy pierced its forward shields like they were paper. For a split second, the Beijing glowed from the inside, a brief, terrible star. Then, it vanished in a silent, expanding cloud of white-hot gas and molten metal. The bridge of the Murasame was dead quiet for a single heartbeat. Then, Chaos erupted. Multiple hull breaches on the Mumbai. They're breaking apart. The Colorado is gone. Just gone. Captain, our forward shields are down to 40% from the energy backlash. Lee Jun's orders were sharp and quick. Evasive maneuver. Pattern Theta. All ships focus fire on their lead elements. Don't let them punch through. The Murasame shuddered as Park Chul fired the plasma cannons. The bright blue bolts of energy shot across the void and struck the hull of a Kthar ship. There was a small flash, a scattering of debris. The alien ship seemed to barely notice. It returned fire. A bolt of the green energy slammed into the Murasame's port side. The ship groaned, a deep, metal sound of agony. The deck plates buckled, and consoles exploded in showers of sparks. The air filled with the smell of ozone and burned insulation. Kim Soo was thrown against a wall in the medical bay. Alarms shrieked in the small room. She picked herself up, her head ringing. The comms on her panel lit up with injury reports from all over the ship. Lacerations, burns, broken bones. She grabbed her medkit and ran, her heart hammering against her ribs. This was real. On the bridge, Yoon Min was trying to make sense of the comms traffic. It was a waterfall of panic, of final messages, of screams. Mayday, mayday. This is the Odyssey. We are static. Life pods won't eject. They're trapped. A sob, then silence. Tell my family I. The transmission cut off. He looked up at the view screen. It was a vision of hell. Human ships were dying everywhere. The Kthar swarm moved through them, methodical and unstoppable. They were not just winning. They were erasing. Captain, Park Chul yelled over the din. The Murasame can't take another direct hit. Primary power is failing. Lee Jun's face was a mask of grim acceptance. He had to get his people out. It was no longer about victory. It was about survival. Helm, full retreat. Get us out of here. Comms. Signal the general withdrawal to any ship that can hear it. The Murasame turned, its engines flaring as it tried to disengage from the slaughter. For a moment it seemed they might have a chance. They were small, fast, and agile. That was when the Kthar fired something new. It was not a weapon of light, but of darkness. A pulse of black energy, rippling through space. It made no sound. It hit the Murasame and every light on the bridge died. The hum of the reactor stopped. The view screen went black. The control consoles flickered and went dead. The only light came from the emergency battery-powered strips on the floor, casting long, terrifying shadows. The only sound was the ragged breathing of the crew and the creak of the dying ship. Park Chul slammed his hands on his dead console. EMP blast. It's fried everything. We're dead in the water. The bridge was plunged into a silence more profound and more frightening than the one before the battle. Through the main viewport, now just a slab of reinforced glass, they could see the final act of the battle. The last remaining human dreadnought, the UEDF Valkyrie, was surrounded by a dozen Kthar ships. It fired its main cannon in a final, defiant blast, shearing the wing off one attacker. Then it was enveloped in a web of green energy. It glowed, twisted, and then imploded into a tiny, dense point of light before vanishing completely. And then, there was nothing. No more human ships. No more transmissions. No more hope. The Kthar Armada, seemingly untouched, began to move. They passed by the derelict Murasame, ignoring the lifeless hulk. They moved as one, a silent, geometric storm, heading inward, heading towards Earth. Captain Lee Jun stood up from his chair. He walked slowly to the viewport and placed a hand on the cold glass. He watched the enemy fleet, the destroyers of his entire species' hope, sail past. He saw the countless stars behind them, cold and indifferent. He turned to look at his crew. Park Chul was frantically trying to reroute power. Kim Soo was back on the bridge, tending to a crewmate with a bleeding cut on his forehead. Yoon Min simply sat in the dark, his headset silent. 9 souls. In the utter silence, on a dead ship, in a graveyard of metal and dreams, the entire Armada was lost. They were all that was left. The silence was the first and most terrible thing. It was a physical weight pressing in on the Murasame. The familiar, comforting hum of the ship's reactor was gone. The constant, low vibration that ran through the deck plates was gone. All that was left was the cold and the dark and the quiet. Captain Lee Jun stood by the viewport, his breath making small clouds in the freezing air. The emergency lights painted his face in harsh red lines. Outside, the stars were sharp and cruel. And against them, he could see the dark shapes of the Kthar Armada moving away. A silent, geometric storm heading towards Earth, towards his home. He felt a hollow ache in his chest. He had failed. "Report," he said. His voice was hoarse, but it cut through the silence on the bridge. "I need a status report. Now." From the engineering station, Park Chul looked up. His console was dark, but he had a handheld tablet connected to a secondary battery. Its weak light illuminated his grim face. "Total system failure, Captain," Park Chul said. "The EMP blast hit us perfectly. The main reactor is in safe mode shutdown. We have no primary power. No engines. No weapons. No shields." He paused, his jaw tight. "Life support is on battery backup. We have maybe 48 hours of air, less if we can't get heat back. The ship is dying." Lee Jun nodded slowly. The news was as bad as he had feared. Survivors. Medic Kim Soo stood up from where she was wrapping a bandage around a crewman's arm. Her young face was smudged with soot, but her eyes were steady. "I've done a preliminary check of the main sections. It seems we are the only ones. The initial blast and decompression. The rest of the crew is gone." Her voice wavered for a second, then grew firm again. "There are 9 of us on the bridge. We are the only life signs I can detect. 9. Out of a crew of 150. Lee Jun closed his eyes for a moment. 9. He looked at the faces around him. Park Chul, the engineer already working on the impossible. Kim Soo, the medic holding on to her duty. Yoon Min, the comms officer, sitting silently at his dead station. And the others, the helmsman, the tactical officer, a few others who had been on the bridge during the battle. They were all looking at him, their captain, the man who had led them into this tomb. "We are not dead yet," Lee Jun said, his voice gaining a little strength. "Engineer Park, I need options. What can we do?" Park Chul ran a hand through his hair. "The first priority is to get some power back. Not the main reactor, that's too complex, but the auxiliary power unit. If I can get the APU online, we can have basic lights, some heat, and maybe restart a few non-essential systems. It might give us more time. Can you do it?" the captain asked. "I have to," Park Chul replied simply. He looked at a big, strong man named Kong Dae, who had been a mechanic. "Kong, you're with me. We need to get to the engineering deck. It's dark and probably full of debris. And it will be cold. Very cold." Kong Dae just nodded, his face set in a grim line. "I am ready." Lee Jun turned to the rest. "The rest of you secure the bridge. Check all systems, even the dead ones. See if anything responds. Yunmin, I need you to try the comms. Anything. A distress call, a fleet channel, even an open channel to Earth. We have to let someone know we are here." Yunmin nodded silently. He put his headset back on and began to work on his dark console, his fingers moving by memory alone. Park Chul and Kong Dae moved towards the bridge doors. They were sealed shut, their power gone. It took both of them, using a manual release lever, to crank them open just enough to squeeze through. The darkness on the other side was absolute. They moved into the corridor. It was a nightmare world. The red emergency lights were few and far between, creating pools of light in an ocean of black. The air was freezing, and their breath plumed out in great white clouds. Wires hung from the ceiling like vines. There was a smell of burned plastic and something metallic. They had to climb over fallen support beams and around jagged pieces of wall panel that had blown loose. It was slow, dangerous work. Their only light came from the handheld torches on their tablets, the beams cutting shaky paths through the dark. After what felt like an eternity, they reached the heavy hatch leading to the main engineering deck. It was also sealed. Park Chul worked the manual wheel, his hands aching with the cold. Kong Day put his strength into it, and together they managed to turn it. The hatch opened with a groan of protesting metal. The engineering deck was the heart of the ship, and now it was a dead heart. The massive main reactor sat in the center, dark and silent. The control panels that usually glowed with 100 different lights were all black. The cold here was deeper, more intense. It felt like a tomb. "Okay," Park Chul said, his voice echoing in the vast, dark space. "The auxiliary power unit is over there." He pointed his light towards a smaller, separate module in the corner. "It has its own fuel cell. If it wasn't physically damaged, we might be able to jumpstart it." They moved carefully across the deck. Their footsteps echoed in the silence. Park Chul opened a panel on the side of the APU. He shone his light inside, his eyes scanning the complex web of wires and components. "It looks intact," he muttered, more to himself than to Kong Day. "The EMP would have triggered the main breaker. I need to reset it manually. But to do that, I need to access the primary coupling. It's in a tight spot." He handed his tablet to Kong Day. "Hold the light. I need both hands." Park Chul lay on his back on the cold deck and slid under the unit. It was a tight, cramped space. He pulled a multi-tool from his belt. His fingers, already numb with cold, fumbled with the tiny latches. He could feel the bite of the metal on his skin. He worked by feel, his eyes closed, remembering the schematics he had studied for thousands of hours. Back on the bridge, the others were working too. Kim Soo had found some emergency blankets and was passing them around. The thin metallic sheets did little to fight the deep cold, but they were better than nothing. Yoon Min had managed to get a faint, static-filled hum from one of his secondary speakers. It was the only sound on the bridge besides their breathing. Suddenly, a voice crackled over the internal comms. It was weak and full of static, but it was Park Chul's voice. "Bridge? Can you hear me?" Lee Jun rushed to the comm panel. "We hear you, engineer. What is your status?" "We're about to try to reset the APU." Park Chul's voice came back, breaking up. "It might cause a small power surge. When I do it, don't be alarmed." On the engineering deck, Park Chul looked at Kong Day. "This is it. When I connect these two leads, it will either work or it will blow the last working circuit in this unit. Ready?" Kong Day nodded, holding the light steady. Park Chul took a deep breath. He brought the two wires together. There was a loud spark and a flash of blue light. Both men flinched. For a second, nothing happened. Then, a low, groaning hum started from deep within the APU. A single light on its control panel flickered, then glowed a steady, beautiful green point one by one. Lights began to come on across the engineering deck. Not all of them, but some. The main overhead lights remained dark, but the emergency lights brightened. A faint warmth began to seep into the freezing air. Back on the bridge, the crew watched in wonder as the red emergency lights were joined by the soft white glow of the main emergency system. The main viewscreen flickered, then came to life, showing the starfield outside. The air circulation system whirred weakly, then began to push slightly warmer air into the room. A soft cheer went up. It was small and tired, but it was real. Lee Jun let out a breath he didn't realize he had been holding. They had light. They had a little heat. They had more time. But then Yoon Min, who had been staring intently at his now active console, spoke up. His voice was quiet, but it silenced the small celebration instantly. "Captain," he said, "I am picking up a signal. It's not human." Everyone turned to look at him. "It's a Kthar signal." Yoon Min continued, his face pale. "It's a proximity alert. They left behind hunter drones. And one of them is heading our way." The small victory of the lights coming on died a sudden, cold death. The faint warmth from the air vents now felt like a betrayer. It was making them comfortable, making them visible. "Hunter drone." Captain Lee Jun's voice was a sharp whisper. "Confirm, Yoon Min." Yoon Min's fingers danced across his console, which now glowed with a soft, borrowed power. He listened intently to the signal only he could hear through his headset. "Confirmed, Captain. It's a low-power, automated signal. A sweep pattern. It's checking the derelicts. He looked up, his eyes wide. It's getting closer. Panic was a living thing in the room. Lee Jun could feel it, could see it in the tight shoulders and darting eyes of his crew. He had to kill it before it killed them. Silence, he ordered, his voice low but absolute. Everyone, not a sound, not a word. The bridge went utterly still. The only noise was the weak hum of the auxiliary power and the thumping of their own hearts. Park Chul, Lee Jun said into the comms, his voice barely audible. Shut it down. Down in engineering, Park Chul heard the order. He looked at the green light on the APU, the symbol of his hard-won success. He looked at Kong Dae, whose face was a mask of frustration. With a grimace, Park Chul reached over and flipped the main switch. The groan of the APU died. The lights on the engineering deck flickered and went out, plunging them back into darkness and cold. The familiar, terrifying silence returned on the bridge. The soft white lights vanished, leaving only the dim red emergency strips. The view screen went black. The hum of the air system stopped. They were a ghost ship once more. All systems off. Park Chul reported over the comms, his voice tight. We are dark. Now we wait, Lee Jun said to his crew on the bridge. And we be still. They waited. The minutes stretched into an hour. No one moved. Kim Soo held her breath, listening. She could hear the blood rushing in her own ears. She thought of the stories about the Kthar drones. They were said to be silent, spider-like machines that would latch onto a hull and cut their way in, searching for any sign of life to extinguish. Yoon Min was their only window to the outside world. He had one earpiece pressed to his ear, the rest of the headset disconnected to save power. His face was a pale, tense mask in the red light. Its signal is getting stronger, he whispered, his voice cracking. It's right on top of us. Through the main viewport they saw it. A shape drifted into view, blocking out the stars. It was smaller than they had imagined, no bigger than a small car. It was all sharp angles and black metal just like the Kthar warships. It moved without thrusters, gliding on some unknown principle. It looked like a piece of floating, dead shrapnel. But they knew it was not dead. The drone moved slowly along the length of the Murasame. It was so close they could see the fine details on its hull, the strange, non-reflective surface that seemed to drink the starlight. A long, thin probe extended from its body, scanning the frigate's scarred hull. Lee Jun felt a cold sweat on his brow. One sound, one heat signature, one power surge. That was all it would take. The drone paused near the bridge viewport. For a heart-stopping moment, it felt as if it were looking right at them, right through the reinforced glass into their souls. Kim Soo squeezed her eyes shut, praying to any god that would listen. The helmsman had his hand clamped over his own mouth, as if to physically stop himself from making a sound. The probe retracted. The drone continued its slow, methodical glide, moving past the bridge and towards the rear of the ship. It's moving away. Yoon Min breathed, his shoulders slumping in relief. The signal is fading. A collective, silent sigh of relief passed through the bridge. They had done it. They had played dead, and the predator had passed them by. But then Yoon Min's face froze. His eyes widened in fresh horror. No, wait. It stopped. It's turning back. It's heading for the engineering hull. On the engineering deck, Park Chul and Kong Dae heard the news over the comms. They were sitting in the pitch black, their backs against the cold metal of the APU. It's coming here, Kong Dae whispered, his voice thick with fear. Before Park Chul could answer, they heard it. A soft, scraping sound from the other side of the hull. It was a delicate, metallic noise, like claws gently tapping on the metal. It was the most terrifying sound they had ever heard. The scraping moved along the outer hull, searching. Then it stopped right above them. A new sound started. A high-pitched, whining hum. It was the sound of a precision laser cutter. A small spot on the ceiling began to glow a faint, cherry red. Tiny droplets of molten metal sizzled and fell, hitting the deck with a soft hiss. The drone was cutting its way in. They're coming in, Kong Dae said, his voice rising in panic. He looked around for a weapon, finding only a large wrench. He held it up, his knuckles white. "Put that down," Park Chul said, his voice surprisingly calm. "You can't fight that thing with a wrench." "Then what do we do?" Kong Dae demanded, his body trembling. Park Chul's mind raced. Fighting was suicide. Hiding was impossible. They had to think like engineers. They had to think like the ship itself. "The blast doors," Park Chul said, an idea forming. "The internal blast doors for this section are manual. We can seal ourselves in. But we need to trick it." He explained his plan quickly, his words tumbling out. Kong Dae listened, his fear slowly being replaced by a grim determination as the red spot on the ceiling grew larger. The two men moved. They worked the heavy manual wheels on the large blast doors that separated the main engineering deck from the rest of the ship. With great effort, they began to seal themselves inside the large room. The sound of the cutting stopped. Outside, the drone would have detected the movement, the sound of metal grinding against metal. It would know there was life here. A large, perfectly cut circle of hull plating fell from the ceiling and crashed onto the deck. Through the hole, they could see the dark, multi-legged shape of the drone beginning to lower itself into the room. "Now!" Park Chul yelled. This was the gamble. The drone was now inside the room they were about to seal. But so were they. With a final, mighty heave, Kong Dae slammed the blast door shut. The heavy clang echoed through the chamber. They were trapped in the dark with the hunter, a light, cold and blue, pierced the darkness. It came from the drone, now fully inside and perched on a control panel. Its several red optical sensors swiveled, scanning the room. They fixed on the 2MEN.IT moved with impossible speed, leaping from the panel and landing silently on the deck just a few meters away. A sharp, spear-like appendage unfolded from its body, pointing directly at Park Chul. Kong Dae raised his wrench, a useless gesture of defiance. But Park Chul stood his ground. He looked past the drone at the hole it had cut in the ceiling. "It's not here for us," he whispered. The drone took a step forward. Then it paused. Its sensors flickered. It was analyzing the atmosphere, the temperature. Park Chul's plan was simple. By sealing the blast doors, they had contained the ship's internal atmosphere in this one room. The rest of the ship was slowly leaking air, growing colder. But in here, the air was still warm from their brief power-up, and rich with the carbon dioxide from their breath. The drone was programmed to find signs of life on a dead ship. It had found the strongest signature and come to investigate. But now, sealed in this room, the signature was contained. To the drone sensors, it might now seem like a localized anomaly, a pocket of gas, perhaps. The two motionless human forms were just background noise. The drone's spear retracted, scanned them once more, then seemed to lose interest. It turned and moved towards the far wall, its sensors scanning the inert main reactor. It was still following its programming, searching for a threat that was no longer there. After a few long minutes, it unfolded its legs and leaped back up through the hole in the ceiling. They heard the soft scraping as it moved away on the outer hull. For a full minute, neither man moved. They just stood in the dark, listening to the fading sound, and to the frantic beating of their own hearts. Finally, Kong Dae lowered the wrench. It's gone." Park Chul leaned against the cold blast door, his legs feeling weak. "It's gone," he repeated on the bridge. Yoon Min finally spoke. "The drone's signal is moving away. It's leaving. It's heading for the next wreck." The tension on the bridge broke. People slumped in their chairs, breathing deeply. They had survived again. Captain Lee Jun looked around at his crew. They were alive, but they were trapped on a dying ship, hiding in the dark from hunters. The Kthar were not just powerful. They were thorough, and Earth was next. He knew then that getting home was impossible. But as he looked at the exhausted, determined faces of the 9 people around him, a new thought began to form. If they could not go home, maybe they could still send a message. The hunter drone was gone, but its cold presence lingered in the silence of the Murasame. The close call had changed something. The desperate hope of getting home had been a fragile thing, and the drone had shattered it. They were not survivors on a journey. They were ghosts in a metal coffin, and everyone knew it. Captain Lee Jun saw it in their eyes. The frantic energy of survival was fading, replaced by a hollow, weary acceptance. They had light and a little heat again, but they were adrift in a graveyard, and Earth was next. He stood up, his movements slow in the cold air. "We cannot go back," he said. His voice was quiet, but it carried across the bridge. "The Kthar fleet is between us and home. Our engines are dead. Our ship is dying." No one argued. They just watched him, waiting. "But we are not without purpose," Lee Jun continued. He looked at Yoon Min. The comms officer found a way to send a signal. A weak one, but a signal. "We cannot send a distress call. There is no one to hear it. But we can send a message." He paused, letting the idea settle. "We will send a record. Everything we have. The battle logs. The sensor data on the Kthar. Everything this ship saw and felt in its final moments. We will send it on a continuous low-power loop towards Earth. It will be a whisper, but it will be the truth." Yoon Min nodded slowly. The narrowband transmitter survived the EMP. It has very little range, but if we aim it perfectly and if someone on the lunar listening posts is looking for any signal at all, they might hear it. "It is a chance. It is more than a chance," Lee Jun said. "It is our duty. But the data logs are not enough." He looked at each of them, his gaze firm. "I want you, each of you, to record a personal message. Not for the military, not for command, for your families, for the people of Earth. I want them to know who was here. I want them to know what we fought for and what we loved." A heavy silence filled the bridge. The idea was terrifying. Recording a final message made their death real. It made it official. Park Chul was the first to speak from the engineering deck over the comms. "Captain, what would I even say?" His voice was rough with emotion. "My daughter, Yuna, she is 6. How do I explain this?" "You don't explain it," Lee Jun said softly. "You just tell her you love her. You tell her about your day. You make it real." One by one, they agreed. Yoon Min set up a small camera linked to the comm system. He found a relatively clean corner of the bridge, away from the broken consoles. The red emergency light gave everything a solemn, dramatic glow. Park Chul was the first to sit down. He looked uncomfortable, staring into the camera lens. He cleared his throat. "Yuna," he began, his voice cracking immediately. He stopped, looked down at his hands, and took a deep, shaky breath. "My little Yuna, if you are hearing this, well." He tried to smile, but it was a sad, broken thing. "Your Appa is sorry he could not come home. I promised you I would see the stars and tell you all about them." He paused, a tear tracing a clean line through the grime on his cheek. "The stars are very beautiful, but they are also very cold. And very far from you." He looked directly into the camera, his face full of a raw, painful love. "I want you to be brave. I want you to be kind. And I want you to look at the night sky and know that I am up there, loving you forever. Goodbye, my darling." He stood up quickly and walked away from the camera, his shoulders hunched. Next was Kim Soo. She sat straight, her medic's uniform still stained with the blood of crewmates she could not save. Her face was pale, but her voice was clear and steady. "To my mother and father," she said, "thank you for everything. Please do not be sad. I was doing my job, and I was proud to do it." She then looked away from the lens, as if speaking to someone else in the room. "To the families of the crew, I want you to know that your sons and daughters, your husbands and wives, they were brave. Until the very end, they were brave. They thought of you. I heard them whisper your names. You were their last thought." She gave a small, sad nod. "That is all." Then it was the helmsman's turn. A young man named Park Ji-hoo. He was usually so full of jokes, but now he just looked like a scared boy. "Mom, Dad, I'm sorry I didn't listen. I'm sorry I joined the fleet. Please tell my brother. Tell him he was right. And tell him he can have my car." He let out a choked sob and covered his face one after another. They came. Kong Dae, the strong mechanic, left a quiet, rumbling message for his wife, telling her to remarry someone good. A tactical officer named Lee Hannah, her voice barely a whisper, sang a soft, haunting lullaby her grandmother had taught her. It was a song about the moon and a rabbit, a piece of childhood innocence sent out into the cold, adult darkness. Finally, it was Captain Lee Jun's turn. He sat down, looking every one of his years. The weight of command was gone from his shoulders, replaced by the simpler, heavier weight of being a man. "I have no family left on Earth," he began. "So I will speak to all of you." He looked into the camera, and it felt like he was looking at every person who might one day hear this. "We lost," he said simply. "Our technology was not enough. Our weapons were not enough. They were stronger than us. That is the truth you must know." He leaned forward slightly. "But do not let that be the only truth you remember. Remember that we were here. Remember that 9 people, on a broken ship, chose to spend their last hours not in fear, but in love. We are sending you our memories, our lullabies, our regrets, the things that made us human." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "The Kthar are powerful, but I do not think they have this. I do not think they sit in the dark and sing songs for their lost children. I do not think they record messages of love to be sent into the void. That is your weapon. That is what they can never take from you. Your humanity, your love for each other. Hold on to it. It is the only thing stronger than them." He fell silent for a moment, then stood up. "The record is complete, Captain," Yoon Min said quietly. Lee Jun nodded. "Then send it." Yoon Min pressed a button. On his console, a small light began to blink. A slow, steady pulse. A digital heartbeat. It was sending their data, their pain, their love, out into the silent blackness, a tiny seed of memory aimed at home. They had no weapons. They had no engines. But they had a voice. And for the first time since the battle had ended, the silence on the Murasame did not feel quite so empty. It was now filled with the echoes of their stories, flying on wings of light towards an uncertain future. The message was sent. It was a tiny, digital whisper in an ocean of silence. For a moment, there was a sense of peace. Their duty was done. But peace was a luxury they could not afford. The reality of their situation returned, colder and heavier than before. They were adrift. The Murasame was a wounded animal, slowly bleeding heat and air into the void. The auxiliary power unit gave them light and a little warmth, but it was failing. Park Chul monitored it constantly, his face grim. The power cells were not designed for long-term use. They were dying. Captain Lee Jun knew they needed a new plan. Drifting was not an option. They would freeze or suffocate long before anyone found their message. He called a meeting on the bridge. All 9 survivors were there, huddled in blankets, their breath misting in the air. "We cannot stay here," Lee Jun said. "The APU will fail in a few days. We have to move the ship." "Move it where?" asked Park Ji-hoo, the helmsman. "The engines are dead. We have no thrust." "Not the main engines," Park Chul interrupted. He had been thinking of nothing else. "The attitude thrusters, the small ones for turning the ship. They have their own fuel and power. They were hardened against EMP. I think I can get a few of them working." Lee Jun leaned forward. "What would that do for us?" "It wouldn't get us home," Park Chul said honestly. "But it could change our course. Right now, we are drifting in the outer solar system. If I can fire the thrusters for a long burn, I could push us into a slow fall towards the inner system, towards the sun. A slow fall towards the sun. It would take months, maybe years. They would never live to see it. But their ship, their message, would be found much sooner. It was a better grave than the empty dark." "It is a good plan," Lee Jun said. "Make it happen." The work was slow and brutal. The ship was a frozen maze. Park Chul and Kang Dae, along with 2 others, spent hours each day moving through the dark, cold corridors. They had to check miles of wiring and fuel lines. They had to clear blockages with their bare hands. Their fingers grew numb, and their muscles ached with the constant cold. Meanwhile, life on the Murasame became a ritual of survival. Kim Soo took inventory of their supplies. The food was mostly gone. The water recyclers were failing. She instituted strict rationing. Each person got one small meal a day and a single cup of water. It was not enough. They were always hungry, always a little thirsty. The cold was their constant enemy. The APU could only heat a few sections. They moved their sleeping quarters to the bridge, the warmest place. They slept on the floor, huddled together for warmth. The blankets were thin. At night, the cold seeped into their bones, making sleep difficult and filled with nightmares of ice and silence. Days blurred into one another. There was no sunrise, no sunset. Only the constant, unchanging stars outside the viewport. The initial bravery they had felt after recording their messages began to fade, replaced by a grinding exhaustion. They talked to keep their spirits up. They shared memories of Earth. Park Ji-hoo described the taste of hot, sweet potato on a cold Seoul street. Lee Hannah talked about the vibrant colors of the autumn leaves in the mountains. Kong Dae, the mechanic, spoke with surprising tenderness about the small garden his wife kept on their apartment balcony. They talked about simple things: the warmth of the sun on their skin, the sound of rain, the smell of freshly cooked rice. These things, so ordinary before, now felt like treasures from a lost paradise. They were fighting for the memory of a warm sunbeam. It was a quiet, human kind of heroism. Yoon Min became the keeper of their sanity. He had found a small, battery-powered music player in a locker. The battery was weak, but it worked. Sometimes, in the evening, he would play old, gentle songs from Earth. The soft melodies would fill the cold bridge, and for a few minutes, they would close their eyes and be somewhere else. They were not soldiers on a wreck. They were just people, listening to music. After 2 weeks of grueling work, Park Chul and his team finally managed to repair 2 of the portside attitude thrusters. It was a small victory, but it felt huge. "Ready for the burn on your command, Captain?" Park Chul said over the comms, his voice raspy with fatigue. Lee Jun stood on the bridge. He looked at his crew. They were thin. Their faces were pale and gaunt, but their eyes were watching him. They were still here. "Do it," Lee Jun said. That a low, deep rumble vibrated through the ship. It was a faint sensation, but after weeks of absolute stillness, it felt like an earthquake. On the view screen, the starfield outside began to shift ever so slowly. They were moving. They were no longer drifting aimlessly. They were on a new course, a long, slow arc that would, one day, carry their story closer to home. The burn lasted for 10 minutes. When it stopped, the silence felt different. They had done it. They had chosen their own fate. That night, as they huddled together for warmth, Kim Soo checked everyone's health. She was worried. They were all showing signs of prolonged hunger and exposure. Their energy was fading. Lee Jun looked around at the faces of the 8 people who had become his family. He saw their strength, but he also saw their exhaustion. They had given everything. "The work is done," he said to them. "We have sent our message. We have set our course. There is nothing more for us to do." He looked at Kim Soo. "Medic, I am giving you a new order. I want you to prepare the cryostasis pods." A few of the crew looked up, surprised. The cryopods were a last resort. They were unreliable. A person might not wake up. "It is the only way," Lee Jun said. "The life support will fail soon. The cold will take us. The pods will put us into a deep sleep. They will preserve our bodies. They will keep us alive." "But for what?" asked Lee Hannah softly. "To wake up when?" "To wake up if someone finds us," Lee Jun said. "Our message is a whisper. Our ship is a beacon. If someone comes looking, they will find us here, waiting. We will have completed our journey." It was a hope so thin it was almost invisible. But it was hope. It was a chance, however small, to one day feel the sun again. One by one. They agreed. It was their last act of defiance. Not to die in the dark, but to sleep and to wait for the dawn. The decision was made. A deep, frozen sleep. It was not a victory, but it was a choice. It was a way to cheat the slow, cold death that waited for them on the dying ship. The cryostasis bay was a place they had avoided. It was a room of last resorts, a gallery of glass coffins. Now it was their only hope. Kim Soo, with Park Chul's help, began the long process of preparing the 9 remaining pods. The systems were on emergency power, and each pod needed to be checked, its fluid pumps and temperature regulators tested. It was delicate work, and a single fault would mean a permanent sleep. While they worked, the others began the final shutdown of the Murasame. It was a solemn ritual. Yoon Min uploaded their final log entry and set the message beacon to repeat its lonely signal for 1,000 years. He then powered down the main comms array, saving the last drops of energy for the cryobay. Park Chul and Kong Dae made one last trip through the ship. They sealed the blast doors, securing the engineering deck and the bridge. They were preserving the tomb. Finally, Park Chul went to the auxiliary power unit, the machine that had been their savior. He set it to a final, low-power mode, directing every last watt to the cryobay's life support. When the power cells were finally drained, the ship would be completely dark and silent once more. 3 days later, they were ready. The cryobay was the only lit place on the ship, a single bright bubble of life in an infinite ocean of night. The pods stood open, their interiors glowing with a soft blue light, filled with the thick, life-preserving fluid. There were no grand speeches left. They had said their goodbyes in their messages. Now, there was only the practical, terrifying act of letting go. Lee Hannah was the first. She hugged Kim Soo tightly. "Thank you," she whispered. Then she lay down in her pod. The glass lid hissed shut. The fluid rose around her, and her body went limp. A single light on the pod turned from blue to a steady, waiting white. Park Ji-hoo went next, then Kong Dae, then the others. Each one was a quiet farewell. A nod, a clasp of a shoulder, a final, tired smile. One by one, they entered their frozen sleep. Soon, only 4 remained in the cold bay. Captain Lee Jun, Park Chul, Kim Soo, and Yoon Min. "You next, engineer," Lee Jun said to Park Chul. Park Chul looked at the complex web of pipes and wires feeding the pods. This was his machine, his final creation. He nodded. He looked at the captain, a lifetime of respect in his eyes. "It was an honor, sir." "The honor was mine," Lee Jun replied. Park Chul lay in his pod. As the lid closed, he thought of his daughter's smile. The glass sealed, and he was gone. Kim Soo checked the readings on Park Chul's pod and the others. Everything was stable. She turned to Yoon Min. "Your turn, comms officer." Yoon Min, the quiet man of sounds, simply nodded. He lay down in his pod without a word, closing his eyes as the blue fluid embraced him. Now it was just the captain and the medic. Kim Soo looked at the last 2 pods. "Captain, I should go last," she said, "to make sure everyone's vitals are stable." Lee Jun shook his head. "That is a doctor's thought. I am the captain. I will see my crew to safety first. That is my duty. Get in your pod, medic. That is an order." Kim Soo wanted to argue, but she saw the finality in his eyes. She had followed his orders into battle and through hell. She would follow this last one. She lay down in the pod. "Goodbye, Captain," she said softly. "Goodbye, Kim Soo," he said. "Sleep well." The lid closed. He watched as her face relaxed into the stillness of stasis. The light turned white. She was safe. Lee Jun was alone. He walked through the silent cryobay, looking at the 9 white lights. 9 testaments. 9 seeds of hope, frozen in time. He performed one final check on each system, a captain's last inspection. Everything was functioning. His ship, his crew were secure. He reached his own pod. He took one last look around the bright, quiet room. Then he lay down inside. The lid sealed above him with a soft, final hiss. The world outside the glass became a blur as the blue fluid rose. He felt a profound cold, and then nothing. The Murasame drifted on. A silent, dark needle on its long, slow fall sunward. Months passed. Then a year. His power slowly faded. The APU gave its last watt and died. The lights in the cryobay went out, plunging the 9 sleepers into absolute darkness. The ship was a ghost, its only voice the repeating whisper of its message beacon. 2 years after the Battle of the Rim, a small lunar patrol vessel, the LSV Watchman, was on a debris tracking mission. Its crew was mapping the wreckage of the Great Battle, a grim and sorrowful duty. Their sensors were tuned to find the silent, frozen hulks of lost friends. That an ensign on the Watchman frowned at his screen. "Commander, I'm picking up a very faint, repeating signal. It's a UEDF automated beacon. Low power. It's coming from that one." He pointed to a blip on the scanner, a small frigate drifting far from the main debris field. The commander leaned in. "The Murasame? I have her on the Kia list. No survivors. It must be a ghost signal from a damaged computer." "Maybe, sir," the ensign said. "But the signal is clean. It's a data stream, and her trajectory is wrong. She's not drifting with the others. She's on a course for the inner system." Someone gave her a push. A spark of curiosity, of impossible hope, flickered in the commander's chest. "Bring us alongside. Prepare a boarding party." The Watchman maneuvered carefully next to the derelict frigate. The boarding party, in heavy environment suits, crossed the airless gap and cut through the frozen outer hatch. They moved through the dark, frozen corridors, their helmet lights cutting beams through the absolute black. They found the sealed blast doors, and then, finally, the door to the cryostasis bay. They forced it open. Their lights swept across the room, illuminating 9 pods, covered in a thin layer of frost. For a moment, their hearts sank. They were too late. They were tombs. Then, the leader of the boarding party saw it. On the front of each pod, a small light was blinking. A soft, steady, green light. It was a life sign stable indicator. "Command, command, this is boarding party 1. The leader stammered, his voice thick with emotion. We have survivors. 9 cryopods. All 9 show stable life signs. They're alive. By some miracle, they're all alive." Back on the Watchman, and soon across the entire solar system, the news spread like wildfire. The Murasame had come home. Not in glory, but in silence. And she had not come alone. The data stream was recovered. The military analysts pored over the battle logs, the Cthar signatures. It was a treasure trove of tactical information. But it was the other part of the transmission, the personal messages, that truly changed things. They were leaked. They were broadcast across the net. The world heard Park Chul's tearful goodbye to his daughter. They heard Lee Hanna's soft lullaby. They heard Captain Lee Jun's final, sober words about the strength of love. The story of the 9 who refused to be forgotten united a broken, grieving humanity. They were not celebrated as badass warriors. They were mourned as brothers and sisters, sons and daughters. Their love, their vulnerability became a symbol. It was not a call for revenge, but a reminder of what was being defended at a hospital on Lunar Orbital 1. Captain Lee Jun woke up. The light was bright. The air was warm. He could feel a real blanket over him. A doctor was smiling down at him. "Welcome back, Captain," the doctor said softly. "You're safe. You're home." Lee Jun turned his head. Through a large window, he could see the beautiful blue and white marble of Earth, hanging in the blackness. It was still there. It was still alive. He was not a hero. He was a witness. And as he looked at his planet, he knew the war was far from over. But the memory of a lullaby, a daughter's smile, and 9 quiet testaments in the dark would now fuel the fight. Humanity remembered what it was.